We're delighted to invite to our School of Tyrannus interview Dr. Steve Gare of the ministry called Sojourner Ministry. And Steve has a wonderful testimony and a wonderful ministry. And he is a Jewish believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, and has a great story to tell about his own personal history with the Lord and his family's history. Steve, it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your family history and their relationship to the Lord and your own personal relationship to Christ?
I've been delighted to. My family has been believers for about 8 decades now. I'm a 4th generation Jewish believer. And what that basically means is that almost 80 years ago, my great-grandmother, Helen Koser, found her Messiah in the Holy Land. That's Brooklyn, as well you know. And she passed down her faith to her daughter, my grandmother, who passed down her faith to her daughter, my mom, who passed down her faith to me. So as a young immigrant, mom of 8, 80 years ago, my great-grandmother was looking for some medical help, and the American Board of Missions to the Jews, ABMJ, had run a dispensary there in Brooklyn, and she went for medical help. And while she received medical assistance, she also received an invitation to come to Sunday school class in Yiddish and learn about the Messiah. She attended with some of her children, and she and some of her children, my great-aunts and my grandma, believed in Messiah. And it has been a family tradition to serve the Messiah ever since.
That is such a remarkable story, because so many of the Jewish people that have come to the Lord tell a story that, you know, they had to kind of break with their family, or there was a breakup in the family as a result. But yours is just the opposite. It's just one generation after another.
Well, you know, in a sense that original generation, that foundational generation, had its own break within it, and the break was between my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather. The issue of Jesus was the issue that, although they lived together and maintained their marriage, drove them apart and separated father from daughter. Literally. And my great-aunt, who was later to become a great missionary, Hilda Koser, to the Jewish people, she used to get, every time she mentioned Jesus, she would get beaten with a hanger, and a nice wooden variety, you know, in those days, you know, the substantial kind, by her father, and he used to call her Jesus. In fact, he never referred to Hilda by her first name again after she came to faith. He just called her Jesus.
Well, it was my privilege to know Hilda Koser. And now she was
my great-aunt.
Great-aunt.
My grandmother's sister.
Yes. And, of course, she's legendary as a missionary with the American Board of Missions to the Jews, which is now called the Chosen People Ministries, in case our people might know it by that name. And she had the ministry in, was it Coney Island? Coney
yes.
Island, yeah. And so she came to Texas on several occasions and had meetings with our people in Dallas, and it was a great time. And I came to really appreciate her. And she mentioned you on several occasions. Watch out! Look for. She didn't say watch out for Steve Gare. She said watch out! Look for my nephew Steve Gare. And so here you are, and following her. A very good example in the ministry. Tell us about the Sojourner Ministry and what you're doing now.
Sure. Sojourner Ministries is actually named after my name. My name, Stephen Gare, my last name, Gare in Hebrew, means sojourner, or wanderer, or stranger.
Yes.
Right. In a sense, I'm the original wandering Jew.
Yeah.
And this particular wandering Jew in my faith journey, which began at the earliest of ages, found that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. I believed what my aunt and my grandmother, I never had the privilege of knowing my great-grandmother, but my aunt, my grandmother, and my mom taught me that Jesus is indeed the Jewish Messiah. In fact, for my aunt, I think my great aunt Hilda, I was the great Jewish hope. I was a miracle baby. My mother and father were unable to conceive for several years, and my aunt told them that if you pray the prayer of Hannah, told my mother. My father was not a believer, my mother was. Told my mother, if you pray the prayer of Hannah, and truly entrust your son to the Lord, then He will indeed bless you with a son. And this is what happened. This is exactly what happened. And from the time that I was born, my great aunt Hilda used to whisper in my ear from the earliest of ages that you are God's child and God has special plans for you. So I guess you could say that she programmed me from an early age, that my destiny was set in stone from literally before the time I was conceived. Because of my mother's prayer, and because of the great women in my family. I'm the first male in my family to become a believer, but I have a great heritage of strong Jewish women who were women of faith, women of prayer, who entrusted the future of their family legacy to the next generation. And in that sense, it's me. And so I'm really proud and privileged and honored to be able to follow in my Aunt Hilda's footsteps, in reaching out to the Jewish people and in sharing the Jewish heart of Christianity with Jews and Gentiles alike.
Well, your story reminds me of two biblical characters. One, the prophet Samuel, who was the fruit of Hannah's prayer, and Timothy, who had believing Jewish mother and grandmother, somewhat along the same line as you did. So you named your ministry Sojourner after Ger. I remember hearing about the Ger Sadiq, the righteous Gentile. Really, as a stranger was a Gentile. But tell me about what you do there. What you have a meeting place? Do you go around teaching? Are you itinerant, so forth?
I'm very simply a Bible teacher, and of course I teach the Bible from a Jewish perspective, and not really intentionally, but the perspective that happens to belong to me, which is a Jewish perspective. The purpose of Sojourner Ministries is to explore the Jewish heart of Christianity, and I believe, of course, the Jewish heart of Christianity is none other than Jesus. And so everything that I do and teach in traveling around the country and indeed around the world. I'm about to leave for New Zealand for a month to teach with Arnold Kuchenbaum and his ministry down under. And everything that I do is geared toward sharing Jesus. Now, I find that because it's my perspective, it obviously becomes a compelling perspective to share from the Jewish perspective, because that is the biblical perspective, of course, and in a sense you could say I own that a little bit more than some others because of my heritage and the privilege that I grew up, especially under such strong teaching that I received from my aunt and my family.
So you teach the Bible to a static group, or you go around from church to church?
I am the sojourner. I am the wandering Jew. I am the wandering Jew. I am in a Messianic congregation most Fridays, about 3 out of 4 Fridays. I lead worship at a Messianic congregation in Dallas. But on the weekends and a quarter of the year, I'm traveling around the country and around the world, from church to church, Sunday school to Sunday school, pulpit to pulpit, small group to small group, and school to school, sharing Jesus from a Jewish perspective. The ministry, although I teach Jewish roots, is really much more concerned with Jesus-ness than Jewishness. Jewishness, for me, the whole Jewish aspect, and, listen, there's a lot of great Jewish teachers, and many of them, and I don't want to dismiss any or to disrespect any, but many of them focus much more, in my opinion, on sharing their Jewishness than Jesus. And that's not me. I use my Jewishness as a means to the end of propagating and teaching and proclaiming the gospel of the Messiah to Jewish people and, in the majority, frankly, to Gentiles. I'm mostly within the context of the church, teaching the church about their Jewish roots, because I believe that if they see Jesus through Hebrew eyes, it is my absolute passionate conviction that when a believer, whether they're Jew or Gentile, sees Jesus through Hebrew eyes in 3 dimensions, okay? Not in black and white, and not as in through the airways, but in true high definition, okay? And they will see him as he was and as he is, then they will in turn get turned on, and they will reach out to my Jewish people. Because as you know, more Jewish people come to faith through the witness of Gentiles.
Strange to say.
Strange to say. Well, not really when you think about the fact that most Jewish people believe that I'm a traitor, and certainly, at the very least, believe that I have a stacked agenda. And so there's a certain amount of distrust the moment I even enter into a conversation about spiritual things. A Gentile, on the other hand, can be a little bit more disarming because
he's expected to be.
He's expected to be a little meshuggah. He's a little, he's a Gentile. What does he know?
Yeah.
We can't expect that he wouldn't know that a man couldn't be God and God couldn't be a man. So, in a sense, when they see the love and the authenticity that comes from a true Jewish believer, they are, as the Romans 11 perspective, they are provoked to jealousy. Of course, the church has done a magnificent job over 17 centuries of fulfilling half that verse, provoking the Jews, period, but not to jealousy.
Well, it's a wonderful ministry, and the Jewishness of Jesus is an interesting thing. I hear people say quite often, well, Jesus was a Jew. But I ask them, well, when did he stop being?
Right.
I mean, he is the son of David. And that's one of the last things he says about himself in the Scriptures.
His entire messiahship is predicated upon his Jewish heritage.
And he has no claim to the messiahship if he is not a Jew, if he is not a son of David, etc. But a lot of that has been lost. We look, I guess the church looks at Jesus through Gentile eyes, and you can see this reflected in the artwork.
Sure.
He has taken on every racial characteristic in the world, just in the artwork. But rarely do you see him as a regular Jewish guy. I've been to Israel many times, and I remember it being said frequently when we were in Galilee. He said, "You want to know what Jesus looked like? Look at these fishermen here who are working the boats, the Jewish men. This is probably what Jesus looked like." And it's quite a different view than what most Western eyes have imagined. I understand you. One of the things that you do is the Passover banquet from time to time.
Yeah,
Tell us a
actually,
little bit about that.
Actually, the Christ in the Passover, or the Messiah in the Passover presentation, is actually what launched my ministry. I was invited, like most Jewish believers are at one time or another, to present a basic presentation of how Jesus fulfilled the Passover, what his Last Supper was like. And, well, I had, of course, attended as a Jewish believer since the earliest of ages, since I was 3 years old. I had attended Christ in the Passover banquets from time immemorial. I had been through the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I could give you a Christ in the Passover demonstration, with my hands tied behind my back and my eyes, blindfolded.
No, not really with your hands tied.
No, very difficult. Well, it's difficult to demonstrate with the hand, but at least with one hand tied behind the back, because especially Jewish people, they can't talk at all with their hands tied. So there has to be a certain freedom, or else you get nothing. Everything shuts down. The system goes kaput. But I had always actually, most of the Christ in the Passovers that I had been to over the years, for me, they were a little bit less than compelling, because they focused more on Jewish practice as practiced in 20th century Jewish tradition, and then took you and pointed back to Jesus. And that wasn't so compelling to me. And so what I began to do is develop a presentation that I actually was interested in hearing, which was focused on Jesus within the context of the first century, and what that Last Supper would have been like, to enter in a sense of storytelling, a presentation of what Jesus would have done and what it would have been like, and instead of beginning from a 20th century perspective and bringing it back, to start from a first century perspective and bring it forward to the 20th, today 21st century perspective. Well, somebody videotaped it at their church, and I heard the announcement that they began to sell these tapes at $15 a pop. And I said, wait a second, I'm not getting a cut. How is this possible?
Where's your royalty?
Right, where's my royalty? So my father-in-law, who's a patent attorney, he said, well, why don't you do your own video? And so the money came together to be able to put one of these videos together, and the video got out there, and before I know it, the people were calling saying, I've heard this video, I've seen this video, can you come and speak at our church? And that launched the ministry.
Well, what are some of the ways in which the first century Passover is different from what the Jewish people do today in the 21st century?
Well, it's not so much what's different, because obviously you've got the same elements. You've got matzah, the unleavened bread. You've got the wine. You've got the cups. You have the bitter herbs, etc. They're the same thing. But the concern that I always have is not so much about Jewish practice. Jewish practice is interesting in a sociological or cultural fashion. What I'm more interested in are the things that Jesus emphasized and that the gospel authors emphasized. The gospel authors didn't write anything specific about bitter herbs and 4 cups and this. They focused on 2 elements, and that was the unleavened bread and on the wine, the cup of the new covenant. Those were the things, while other things may have been mentioned specifically by Luke, in a sense in passing, to establish that we are indeed within the context of a Passover Seder. The Last Supper was undoubtedly a Passover Seder. What Jesus emphasizes, and what I think is most integral to our understanding of who Jesus is his identification with the matzah, with the unleavened bread, because he is, in a sense, the unleavened Messiah. And it is his unleavenedness, if you will, in other words, metaphorically, his sinlessness, okay, by way of illustration, his sinlessness, his sinless nature, as matzah is without leaven, without symbolic sin, so too Jesus is symbolically without leaven. He is the unleavened Messiah. Therefore, that's really the most important element when we think about who he is, because if he was with even a drop, even a grain of sin, of leaven, then he would not be qualified. He'd be disqualified to be our Messiah. And when he pours the cup, the third cup, the cup of redemption, and says, this is the new cup, or this is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for the forgiveness of sin, this becomes the crucial element in establishing a new era in human history. Because it's from this point on that the inauguration of the new covenant, in a sense, begins. The announcement of the new covenant, the long expected 600-700 year expectation that the Jewish people had, that Messiah would come and establish the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, putting the law within the hearts of the Jewish people, and all people, in a sense, not just Jewish people, but Gentiles as well, and establishing a completely new covenant, a new way of dealing and relating with people, both Jews and Gentiles, the establishment of the church age. This is magnificent and truly a turning point, a crux in history, where both God and man, from vertical and horizontal, relationally change. The relationship between Jew and Gentile changes. The relationship between man and God changes, all based upon the eating of this bread and this cup. And this is something that so many Christians, within the context of a monthly communion service or even a quarterly communion service, they take for granted. Sheer repetition, because of human nature, can sometimes leach out the revolutionary nature of what Jesus preached, what Jesus proclaimed, and what he actually did in establishing the bread and the wine.
I often tell my people that it's when they realize the deep roots of that is in the Lord's Supper, in the Passover, it enriches the understanding of it and the comprehension of what the Lord was doing there.
Absolutely, and that's a message that reverberates and resounds year-round. I get a lot of invitations during the Lenten season, a couple of weeks and months before Easter. Everybody wants to hear the Last Supper for Holy Week, and they want to hear the Passover presentation, that month, April and March. Yeah. But, I do these presentations year-round, because as long as you take in communion year-round, this is a relevant and essential, integral presentation and understanding for your congregation to have.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, it's been a real joy to hear about you, your life, your testimony, how you came to know the Lord, and your ministry in the Sojourner Ministries. And we thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure. Shalom.
Shalom.